So from here on out, you will be citing all of your history papers, including your internal assessment. The reason why we use Chicago Manual Style in history is because we cite anything that's not common knowledge. So if we have to look up something, we have to cite it. In other places, like in English class or science, you cite when you use direct information. But in history, you cite when you use indirect information too. So as a result, we use footnotes. And that is what this section is going to be about, is how to cite your paper. And then we'll look at different writing techniques and tips. The first thing to remember is you're writing a formal paper. And so in formal papers, we double space. The only time you don't double space is when you're doing like a large quotation, your footnotes or bibliography entries, table titles, or figure captions. Otherwise, your major document is double spaced. Your page numbers begin in the header of the first page at the top left. Margins should be set at no less than 1 inch. Typeface should be something readable, such as Times New Roman, Arial, one of those. And then the font size should be no more than 12-point font. Your title page for a formal essay should start centered a third of the way down with the title of the essay. Following that, your name, class information, and date should follow several lines later. You're going to make sure to double space again, and the very last thing that you're going to add is a word count of your total documents, or your total document. But remember, word count does not include footnotes and bibliography. So I do have a rule about quotations. If you are going to use a quote from a historian or from a source, you have got to follow that quote up with your own analysis. So just quoting George Washington is not enough for a history essay. The very next sentence needs to be, why is this important? Why is this significant? Analyze those words. Say something like, this quote shows as evidence that supports my argument, and fill in your argument. If you're going to use a large quotation, which again, you might use in an extended essay, I don't really like them in your internal assessment or in formal papers for me, but if you do, you're going to put it in a smaller offset text, okay? So you're going to highlight that, then put it in a smaller font and indent it. And that's what we do with larger quotations. But again, be very careful about doing that. I do not like them. As I said before, history is cited whenever information is used by either thought, idea, or evidence. Anything that is not common knowledge must be cited. When in doubt, cite your work. For sure, cite it. And there's a special way to cite, which we will go in next. But again, you cite anything that's not common knowledge. An example of this is, it's pretty common knowledge that the American Revolution began in 1774. But if I were then to talk about the significance of the American Revolution, I'm getting that from somewhere and I need to cite it. The first thing I want to say is that if you're using Microsoft Word, they have something built in called reference, and you can write the type of reference you want to do, which is CMS for you, and then you fill in a box and it will make your footnote for you. If you are using Google Docs, you can do the same thing. You just have to add an add-on and one in which will do your bibliography and your citations for you. So if you go to add-on, you can find several different things in there that can help you. All right, so we use in-text footnotes with full citations that appear at the bottom of the document. Each time you use a citation, it notes a number, and the first citation you use starts with 1, and then it goes all throughout the document. Note numbers should be placed at the end of the sentence to which you are referring, and should be placed after all punctuation. So we want to make sure that we're placing our footnotes in the correct order in terms of punctuation. We want to remember we cite whenever we're not using common knowledge, and we're going to use footnotes. And certainly Google Docs and getting something that does that for you is the best way to go. So in the footnote, what you're going to do is, first of all, if you're using if you're using something that creates this for you, it's much easier. They give you boxes. You can just put the information in and it spits it out for you. But if you're doing it on something different, then for footnotes, you want to do for the very first time you use one. You only have to do this once, but you have to write out the full citation. So you start with first name, last name of author, comma. Title of the work, comma. Parentheses, you put the city that it was published in and the year it was published in. Add a comma, and you must add the page number. It must be a page number. If you're doing a website, there's different ways to do it, but remember, the very first time you use this, you are going to do the full citation. If you use the same source again, there are different methods for that we will go over next. So once you've used the full citation in a footnote once, it can be abbreviated throughout the rest of the paper. So if it's an author, you just put the author's last name, you shorten the title, and add a page number. And you can do this anytime you use that source again. You also can do something if you want to be fancy and use Latin. If you're using the same source as the footnote above it, you may use the word I bid, which means see above, and it means this is the same source that I just cited in another sentence. It's right above. Just look up there, and you put I bid and page number. If you're using a website, it doesn't have a page number. Of course, you leave it out. Here is what you do if you're going to use a web source, and most of us are. We might even find a book online and just want to cite it as a web source. That's really your choice. If you find a book online and want to cite it as a book, you can do that, or you can cite it from the source you got it from. It's probably better to cite it as a book, though. But okay, so you found a web source. You think it's legitimate. It's not one of those fake ones. What you're going to do is, if this stuff is available, you put it on the footnote. If it's not available, skip it. So if you know the author of the website or the organization that publishes the website, that's the first thing you put. Then you do a comma. Next, you do the title of the web page, comma. Name of the web page, comma. This is in case, like, let's say you get something from NPR. Well, the title of the web page is going to be a little different, and the name of the website is, of course, NPR. Again, we're going to do a comma. Publishing organization, if there is one. If there's not, forget it, comma. Publication date, if available. If not, forget it, comma. Here's the big thing. You have to put the date you accessed it on. Okay, so sometimes I make up dates, or you know the date you're doing it. So today is like September, I don't know, what, 26th, 25th, I don't know what date it is. But I would put that, and I would put the year, and then comma, and that's where you put the URL. Again, you only have to do this once, okay? Once you've cited it fully the first time, if you use this source again, you can shorten it, and we'll see how to do that. Here is an example of a footnote from a web page. Again, I want to remind you that if any of this information is not available, you simply eliminate it. That's the cool thing about a footnote. You don't have to go searching. If you don't have an author, you just don't put that author on there. Okay, so there's your example. In case you do find an online copy of a book, it's important to understand that electronic books are cited exactly as their print counterparts, with the addition of the media marker at the end of the citation. So you can put a Kindle, PDF, ebooks, whatever. Books consulted online can also end with the URL. You are now writing history, and in history we do bibliographies. This is important to remember. We do not do a works cited, we do bibliographies. And we never put anything in our bibliography that we have not put a footnote in the paper. I'm going to say that again. We do not put books and sources in our bibliography that have not been actually cited within the essay. Okay? This is where you do single space. So your bibliography is single space, but you need to remember to leave blank lines between each entry. You also need to remember that each entry, the first line is, aligned over to the left, but if there's a second or third line, you need to indent those. Okay, so we want a clean bibliography. Again, why do the work when you have things that'll do it for you? So once you are building using one of these things from like Google Docs or Word, you just click a button and it spits out your bibliography for you. So a bibliography entry is a little bit different than a footnote. Footnotes, we start with first name, last name, and we do commas all through it. Where a bibliography, you start with the last name of the author, then comma, first name, and then every entry ends with a period. So if you just follow this until you get to the place of publication and the name of the publisher, but follow this punctuation, and if you're making your own bibliography, this is the general format. Again, a bibliography entry for a website is again a little bit different than the differences in the punctuation and some order of things. There is an example of it. Again, you always want to add that access date. It's important to remember that our footnotes and our bibliography entries are a little different. So in your footnote, again, there's an example right there. You see first name, last name, everything is mostly commas. In a bibliography entry, we switch them and you get the last name first and then the first name, and then everything's either, periods or some other form of punctuation. So this section we're going to talk about writing tips, and I can tell you that one of the biggest mistakes kids make is they're too narrative in their writing. They want to tell stories, and stories are great actually as a way to prove evidence. It's wonderful to have that kind of flair for writing, but in reality we are writing a formative essay in which we are using facts and evidence and analysis and synthesis in order to come up with our ultimate idea and to really support our arguments that we're making. So we really write more like scientists versus writing like you do in literature. The number one thing to do before you start to write is to, of course, come up with an arguable thesis. This is not an obvious statement. You must actually have an arguable point of view. This sometimes doesn't happen, though. We come up with an idea, a topic. We know we want to write about something. We might even know our argument, but we haven't done our research yet. So again, and I don't think I've said this yet, but I will say this. The first step to all good writing is research your topic. Know it. Know it like you know anything that you want to write about and be an expert at. Next, then, you're going to come up with your arguable thesis. An example is, the one I have here, and it says, although many historians argue that Hitler was a master planner, he was actually an opportunist that took advantage of social, economic, and political upheavals of the 1930s. I've made an argument here. I've said that I don't think that Hitler came up naturally with this master plan that he was going to implement and then took it step by step by step. Rather, he took advantage of the Great Depression and the opportunities and took control that way, and he was able to maneuver his policy. Do you see the different arguments? Historians argue both sides. So, coming up with something like that is always a good way to start your essay. So now you've developed an arguable thesis, your point of view over a specific event. Now you need to find evidence. Every body paragraph should at least have 3 points of evidence, or if you're going to cover 1 point of evidence per body paragraph, you better have a lot of analysis that goes with it. You're better off sticking with 2 to 3 points, though. Evidence should support your thesis for the most part, but offering counter-arguments to verify your own is encouraged, especially if you can show key historical debates in your essay. So it's okay to talk about those historical debates. Just make sure your point of view, your argument, is always central to your theme. Do not ever invalidate your own argument stated in the thesis. Do not sit on the fence on an issue like, I can see this side of the fence and I can see that point of view, and don't do that. You need to be strong. You need to come up with your argument. But again, offering differing perspectives is what we call it, is always a good way to score points as well. Okay, so now we've followed our steps. First, we've researched, right? We know our topic. Second, we've come up with an arguable thesis, and then we added our evidence. And you can do this in a chart form where you just start making a chart with pieces of evidence. Once you have all of that, you're actually ready to write your paper. And this part is the analysis. That's the key to a good history paper, much like it's the key to a good scientific experiment. Each piece of evidence that you state in your paper needs to be analyzed in order to prove your argument. So I would say maybe the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen is a piece of evidence, correct? What is the significance of it, though? And that's where the analysis comes in. How or why is this important? How does it support my argument? How does it connect to bigger issues I'm discussing? Analyze either the cause or the effect of the evidence. If I'm looking at the causes, I say, the causes of the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, or the effects of it. But do you see how I have my evidence and then my analysis is why is this important? Honestly, in the 17 years I've been teaching, this is the #1 mistake kids make, and I think it's because they think it's the easiest, and it is not the easiest. Perhaps it is in a literature essay, but in history, it is where you finally conclude, after all the evidence and all the analysis, you are finally concluding in a paragraph the answer to your question. So as a result, in a conclusion, I will literally take 20 points off if you don't have one. I feel very strongly about this. First of all, no new information. You have already presented all your evidence, your analysis, your quotes, they're all in your paper. This should be all analysis. I have reached this conclusion because, and it also needs to be obvious. So you want to start it with, in conclusion, in the end. Please don't use the word thusly, though, because nobody likes that word. As teachers, we hate that word. Do not use thusly. But anyways, you want to make it obvious in a reasoned conclusion. Do not restate your thesis. Do not rewrite your introduction. This is everything that you conclude from your analysis. You've already, again, presented the evidence. You don't have to repeat it. The most important thing you can do is say, why was this important? How does it connect to greater events within the French Revolution? How does it affect today, if you want to end it with it? But you want to keep in mind that. On that note, on good history, well, I will talk about that actually in the next slide. Okay. So I've already discussed this, but it bears mentioning again my rule on quotations. You never use quotations in place of your own analysis. You cannot skip describing why a quotation is important without, you have to do it. You have to do it. I will cross it out. I'm just telling you right now. I do not like it when kids use quotations in place of writing. And I'm almost to the point where I'm going to say quotations no longer count towards your word count, just to get kids to quit doing it. Sure, a good quote is great, but any quote must be followed by your own interpretation of why it proves your argument. I feel very strongly about this. I don't know if you caught that yet. Lastly, these are some very important tips to remember. Very, very few people can just write genius work in their first draft. Good writing is edit, edit, edit. Give it to somebody else, have them edit, then take it back and edit it again. That is so key to good writing. Please do not get discouraged when your first draft is just simple sentences like Louis was king. That's okay. Get it all down and then you go back and you make those simple sentences better and you add analysis and you add it. It's about construction. You start at the bottom level and build, build, build until you have a pyramid, okay? Edit, edit, edit. My other big advice, and kids never follow this, but cite as you write. You will forget to add citations, and then you run into the danger of plagiarism. If you don't want to do the full citations because you're in a groove and you're writing, then come up with a system. What I usually do is I get my list of sources first because I'm really big on research first, and then I number each source in a little like chart. And then what I do is as I'm writing and I know I'm getting it from a source, I just put the number of that source in, you know, at the end of the paragraph, and then later I'll go in and put my footnotes in. But I'm a master writer at this point. You should probably just stop, do your footnotes, but try to remember to cite as you write. This is the other big thing. History is always written in the past tense. You do not use present tense. You do not use the word I in a history paper. You are writing in the past tense, always, okay? That is important to remember. I will correct you every time you do it. Also, you don't want to try to fall into that trap where you're using what I call future tense, where you're going, had been there, or, you know, anything like that. You want to, I mean, no, had been will work, but you want to stick in past tense, okay? There is no contractions in formal writing. A contraction is like can't. You spell it out, cannot, okay? Also, you're going to avoid slang, derogatory, and outdated terminology. You are writing a formal paper. Use correct socio-anthropological terminology if you're going to describe people. You also want to capitalize formal names and places. Those are just some of my tips for writing. We will go over this further in class, but it's very important that you probably watch this, keep this, rewrite, you know, rewatch it, take notes on it, because you will be citing using this method. And these are my rubrics. This is what I count off for. So good luck, children, and we will discuss more of this soon.